There are moments in life that split everything into a before and after. For CEO Richard Lawson, that moment arrived on a gray, rain-soaked Tuesday morning. High above the city in the skyscraper that carried his name. The thunder outside echoed the tension inside the boardroom, where billion-dollar deals were being dissected. But just beyond those glossy glass doors, another kind of storm was unfolding. Quiet, unseen, and far more personal. Maria Alvarez, a reserved cleaner who had spent 3 unnoticed years maintaining that same building, carried hidden bruises beneath her uniform. Marks that whispered a story no one had ever stopped to hear. Until that morning, when Richard looked up and truly saw her for the first time. What followed would shake his company to its core, transforming not just its policies, but its people, and its heart. If you believe in compassion, redemption, and standing up for what's right, please like this video, subscribe to Stories of Kindness, and share your thoughts below. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Maria Alvarez was 26, and moved like someone trying to disappear. Always early, always precise, always silent. Colleagues called her shy, maybe distant, but the truth was steeped in fear. Her nights were haunted by shouting, slammed doors, and the sound of a man's fists against her ribs. Her boyfriend, Caleb, had once been kind. Now he was a shadow of that man, volatile, cruel, and impossible to predict. Leaving wasn't simple. Maria had no family, no close friends, and her cleaning job at Lawson Enterprises was the only stability she had left. Her body bore the price of that silence, a fading bruise along her cheekbone, fingerprints hidden beneath her sleeves, and eyes that avoided mirrors. Richard Lawson, by contrast, was impossible to overlook. At 38, he was among the city's youngest self-made CEOs, admired for his sharp instincts and iron discipline. But his success had cost him dearly: a failed marriage, a strained relationship with his teenage daughter, and a circle of people who only echoed what he wanted to hear. Richard lived at the top, blind to the lives below, until that Tuesday. It began with a spilled cup of coffee in the executive lounge. Richard had returned early from a client meeting, and found Maria quietly mopping the mess left by a careless executive. She froze when she noticed him, instinctively raising a hand to her cheek. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Not the fleeting glance of strangers, but the kind that lingers and speaks. Her eyes were red, not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper. He noticed the faint purplish mark on her face. Bruises don't lie. A sudden memory struck him. His daughter crying after her mother's remarriage. Tears he had dismissed as just a phase. Maria's silent pain mirrored something he'd ignored before. He took a step toward her. She took one back. He lifted his hands slowly, careful not to startle her. He wanted to ask, "Who did this to you?" But the words felt too sharp, too invasive. Instead, Richard did something entirely out of character. He sat down. Maria froze. In 3 years, no one had ever spoken to her as though she mattered. Richard gently asked if she wanted some water, if she'd like to sit, if she was safe. She shook her head each time, but her hands trembled. When he softly said, "You don't have to pretend here," something inside her cracked. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Then she turned and ran. That night, Richard didn't sleep. The image of her tear-streaked face refused to leave his mind. The next morning, he asked HR for her file. He learned her full name, her emergency contact, her pay, which barely covered rent. Then he began asking questions he'd never asked before. Did the company offer domestic abuse support? Mental health services? No one had answers. So, Richard decided to become the answer. Maria didn't return for 2 days. When she finally came back, she looked paler, quieter. But something in the office felt different. The receptionist greeted her with warmth. A small care package waited in her locker. And that evening, when she stepped into the janitor's closet, Richard was there, waiting. He didn't interrogate her. He simply handed her a small card. On it were phone numbers: a women's shelter, a legal advisor, and a therapist. "If you ever need someone to talk to," he said gently. "And it doesn't have to be me. These people will listen." Maria's hands shook as she held the card. "Why?" she whispered. Richard was silent for a long moment. Then, with a voice that cracked, he said, because someone once told my daughter to stay quiet, and I didn't listen soon enough. That night, Maria made a choice. Not to fix everything, but to begin. She called the shelter. She spoke with a counselor. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Richard quietly covered the cost of her sessions, arranged her transfer to a day shift, and launched a silent reform throughout Lawson Enterprises, establishing employee protections, anonymous reporting lines, and empathy training for management. Word spread. The CEO was changing. He no longer rushed past janitors or assistants. He began sitting with receptionists, chatting with baristas, listening to interns. And when a young staff member faced harassment from her manager, Richard himself escorted the man out of the building. The media called it a PR stunt, but those close to him saw the truth. In his softened tone, his patience, his eyes. Maria began to heal. She filed a restraining order. She moved into a shared apartment with other survivors. Months later, after earning her GED through company-sponsored classes, she found a letter in her locker. It read, "You are stronger than you know. When you're ready, there's a desk waiting for you." No pressure, just belief. 3 months later, Maria walked into HR, smiling. Her lavender blouse revealed her unmarked arms, her posture steady, her eyes bright. From the balcony above, Richard watched quietly. What he felt wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was grace. If this story touched your heart, if Maria's courage or Richard's change inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world. It only takes one act of kindness to change a life. Before you go, tell us in one word what this story meant to you: hope, strength, redemption. We'd love to hear your thoughts.